Imagine waking up one morning to find everything has turned dark. Andrés Montez was 24 years old, with an inherited fortune and a whole life ahead, when he opened his eyes and found himself trapped in absolute blackness. Doctors said it was impossible, that he would never see again. But what no one knew was that God had a different plan, and the greatest miracle would not only be regaining his sight, but discovering true love amidst the darkness. Stay until the end of the story. Subscribe to the channel and discover how a miracle can change everything. Since the age of 16, Andrés Montez began noticing strange things. Bright spots would suddenly appear when he looked at the sky. Brief blackouts lasting seconds that then vanished as if they had never been there. At first, he thought it was fatigue. Maybe he had spent too many hours in front of the computer or studying for exams. His family was one of the most traditional in Mexico City, and as the only child, he carried the responsibility of upholding the family legacy. He had no time to worry about minor discomforts, so he ignored the signs one after another, convinced they would pass on their own. He never imagined those spots were the prelude to something much bigger, something that would change his life forever. Years passed, and the distortions continued, appearing and disappearing like silent ghosts. Andrés learned to live with them, to ignore the moments when the world blurred for an instant. He thought it was normal, that everyone experienced such things occasionally. But then came that March morning. Andrés was 24 and had just returned from a business trip to Monterrey. He had gone to bed exhausted, feeling he had fulfilled all his responsibilities. He closed his eyes expecting a restorative rest, unaware that that night would be the last time he would see his room as he knew it. When he woke up, the first thing he noticed was the strange silence surrounding him. He opened his eyes slowly, expecting to see the sunlight filtering through the curtains as always. But he saw nothing, absolutely nothing, just a dense, profound darkness that enveloped him completely. For a few seconds, he remained still, thinking he was still dreaming. He moved his hand in front of his face, searching for a shadow, some sign of movement. Nothing. Panic began to climb his throat like a cold snake. He sat up abruptly, stumbling with the sheets as he tried to reach the bedside lamp. His hands trembled as he finally found the switch and pressed it 1, 2, 3 times. But the darkness remained intact, absolute, terrifying. He screamed for the first time, a muffled cry that came from the depths of his being. His parents came running, alarmed by the sound of anguish they had never heard from their son before. When they entered the room, they found Andrés standing by the bed, eyes open but lost, staring into nothing. His mother took his face in both hands, calling his name with a trembling voice. He could feel her warm hands, hear her broken voice, but he couldn't see her. He couldn't see anything. Tears began to roll down his cheeks as he repeated the same words over and over. "I can't see, Mom. I can't see anything." What followed was a whirlwind of hospitals, consultations, and waiting rooms. Andrés' father, a man accustomed to solving problems with money and connections, mobilized all available resources. They called the best ophthalmologist in Mexico, who, after examining Andrés for hours, ordered specialized tests: CT scans, MRIs, blood tests, genetic screenings. Everything modern medicine could offer was used to try to find an answer. But each result came with the same baffling conclusion. There was no visible physical damage, no trauma, no logical explanation for what had happened. His optic nerves were intact, his brain functioned perfectly, and yet Andrés could not see. It was as if his eyes had simply decided to stop working from one day to the next. The doctor, a 60-year-old man with decades of experience, admitted something he rarely confessed. He was completely lost. During those first weeks, Andrés sank into deep despair. He stopped eating regularly, barely slept, and when he did, his dreams were filled with images of everything he could no longer see. His room became a dark prison, where he spent hours sitting in silence, trying to process the impossible. His friends tried to visit, but he rejected all visits. He didn't want anyone to see him like that, vulnerable, broken, dependent. Rage grew inside him like a fire consuming everything in its path. He cursed his luck. He questioned why it had happened to him. Why? Just when his life was beginning. His mother cried silently every night, begging God for a miracle that seemed impossible. His father, always so strong and determined, now looked aged, carrying a weight that money couldn't alleviate. The Montez family faced the toughest trial of their lives, and it was only just beginning. The world's best specialists began arriving in Mexico City. A neurologist from Boston, a geneticist from Switzerland, a full team of researchers from Japan. All wanted to study the case of Andrés Montez, the young man who had lost his sight for no apparent reason. They subjected him to more exhaustive tests, some so invasive they left him exhausted for days. They asked him to describe exactly what he had felt, what he had seen in the moments before, if there had been pain, or any unusual symptoms. Andrés responded with patience at first, but as days passed, his cooperation turned into resentment. He was tired of being treated like an experiment, an anomaly, rather than a person. Yet the doctors persisted. One of them, a renowned German researcher, told his family that Andrés' case was unique in the history of modern medicine. He had never seen anything like it and probably never would again. The medical conclusions were devastating. After 3 months of intensive studies, the specialists met with the family to deliver their final verdict. The official diagnosis was simple but brutal: blindness of unknown origin, no available treatment, no hope of recovery. The words fell on the room like heavy stones. Andrés' mother covered her face with her hands. His father clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. Andrés, sitting in silence, felt something inside him break definitively. The doctors explained they would begin long-term research, that his case would be documented and studied for years in hope of someday helping others. But Andrés, those words sounded hollow. He didn't care about helping future patients if he was condemned to live in darkness forever. When the doctors left the office, a heavy silence settled among the 3 family members. There were no words that could ease that pain. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Andrés refused to leave his room, rejecting any attempt by his parents to cheer him up or distract him. When his mother spoke of God, of faith, of everything having a purpose, he interrupted her with bitterness. "What purpose can this have, Mom? What kind of God does this to someone?" His words were like knives piercing his mother's heart, but she understood his pain. She knew the rage was part of the process, that her son needed time to accept what he had lost. Still, every night she prayed in silence, pleading for something to change, for her son to find peace, for a miracle to arrive, though it seemed impossible. Her husband, more pragmatic, decided to take action differently. If Andrés wasn't going to regain his sight, at least he needed to learn to live with his new reality, and for that, he needed professional help. That's when they decided to hire a specialized caregiver. They needed someone experienced with blind individuals, patient, trained, and above all, someone who could connect with Andrés beyond his condition. They contacted a prestigious agency that recommended 2 highly qualified professionals. The first was a 40-year-old woman with 15 years of experience, impeccable references, and a list of satisfied families. They scheduled an interview for a Monday morning. Everything seemed perfect until 2 days before, when the woman called to apologize. A family emergency in Guadalajara had arisen, and she couldn't take the job. The Montez family was bewildered, but quickly contacted the second candidate. She was younger, 32, but equally prepared. They agreed she would start the following Friday. However, on Thursday night, they received another call. The second caregiver was also canceling, this time due to sudden health issues. Andrés' mother felt something more was at play, something that couldn't be explained by mere bad luck. That night, desperate and exhausted, she knelt in her room. With tears rolling down her face, she lifted a sincere prayer. "Lord, I don't know what to do anymore. I've tried everything and nothing works. If my son needs help, please send the right person. Not someone I choose, but someone you choose, someone who can reach his heart in a way we haven't been able to." She went to sleep with that plea on her lips, unaware that God was already responding. The next morning, the phone rang early. It was the agency, profusely apologizing for the inconveniences, but they had one last option, though different from the others. It was Mayara Ramirez, a 21-year-old who had just completed her certification as a caregiver. She had little experience, but the few families she had worked with spoke wonders of her. She was responsible, loving, and had something special that was hard to describe. Andrés' mother, recalling her prayer from the night before, felt something in her chest. Without thinking twice, she replied, "Send her tomorrow." And so, unknowingly, they had just opened the door to the miracle that would change everything. Mayara Ramirez arrived on a Saturday morning with a small suitcase and a smile that lit up her face. She was a humble young woman, born in a simple neighborhood in Iztapalapa, but with a presence that filled any space. She wore faded jeans and a white embroidered blouse that had belonged to her grandmother. Her dark hair was tied in a simple braid, and a small silver cross hung around her neck. Andrés' parents received her with some reservation, still skeptical after the 2 previous cancellations. But when Mayara greeted them with a warm, firm voice, something in her gaze instilled confidence. There was a peace in her that was hard to explain, as if she carried an inner light that nothing could extinguish. Andrés' mother, remembering her prayer, felt a shiver run down her spine. Perhaps, just perhaps, this young woman was the answer she had been waiting for. They showed her the house, explained the routine, and finally led her to Andrés' room. When Mayara entered, she found a young man sitting on the edge of his bed, his gaze lost in nothingness. He didn't move when he heard footsteps approaching, nor when his mother made the introductions. He simply remained there, motionless, like a cold marble statue. Mayara approached with soft steps, not invading his space abruptly. "Hello, Andrés. My name is Mayara, and I'll be here to help you with whatever you need," she said with a calm voice. He didn't respond. For several seconds, silence filled the room. Finally, with a sharp tone meant to push anyone away, Andrés spoke. "I don't need help. I don't need anyone. And I definitely don't need charity from a stranger." His words were harsh, designed to hurt, to create distance. Mayara didn't flinch. She had known pain before. She knew how to recognize it when she saw it. She simply nodded, though he couldn't see it, and replied, "I understand. I'll be here if you change your mind." Without saying more, she left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. The first days were a silent battle. Andrés rejected any attempt by Mayara to get close. When she prepared breakfast, he barely touched it. When she suggested a walk in the garden, he flatly refused. When she tried to start conversation, he responded with monosyllables or ignored her altogether. But Mayara didn't give up. Every morning, she entered his room with the same positive energy, as if the rejection from the previous day had never happened. She told him simple things, how the weather was, what flowers had bloomed in the garden, the news she'd heard on the radio. She didn't expect responses. She simply talked, filling the silence Andrés had built around himself. Sometimes, while she spoke, she noticed him slightly turning his head toward her voice, though he tried to hide it. They were small signs, almost imperceptible, but for Mayara, they were enough. She knew that behind that shell of bitterness was a frightened young man who needed time. One afternoon, after nearly 2 weeks of resistance, something changed. Andrés had been particularly irritable that day, rejecting everything Mayara offered. But when dinner time came, the aroma of homemade pozole filled the house. It was her grandmother's special recipe, with cacahuazinto corn, pork, and a touch of guajillo chili that made all the difference. Andrés, who had lost his appetite months ago, felt his stomach react to the smell. He said nothing, but when Mayara entered with a plate, he didn't refuse it. He sat in silence and began to eat slowly. It was the first time he had finished a full plate since losing his sight. Mayara, from her chair on the other side of the room, smiled silently. She made no comment, didn't celebrate the small victory. She simply stayed there, accompanying him as he ate. When Andrés finished, he murmured something so low she could barely hear it. "Thank you." It was one word, but laden with more meaning than he himself could grasp. From that moment, the barriers began to fall little by little. Andrés started accepting morning walks in the garden, leaning on Mayara's arm as they strolled among the rose bushes and orange trees. She described everything with such detail that he could almost see it in his mind. The intense color of the bougainvillea, the erratic flight of monarch butterflies, the clouds moving slowly across the sky. Sometimes, as they walked, Mayara began to hum praise songs, soft melodies that filled the air with an inexplicable peace. Andrés never commented on the songs, but he also didn't ask her to stop. In the evenings after dinner, Mayara read him the newspaper. Not just important news, but also the quirky stories, celebrity gossip, sports chronicles. Andrés listened in silence and occasionally asked a question or made a soft remark. They were brief conversations, but each one was a step toward the light. And though Andrés still didn't speak of God, Mayara prayed for him every night before sleeping, trusting that the Lord had a perfect plan, and that plan was just beginning to unfold. 3 months had passed since Mayara arrived at the Montes house. Andrés' transformation was notable, though he himself wouldn't admit it. He had regained some weight, smiled occasionally at the jokes Mayara told, and had stopped locking himself in his room all day. His parents watched with gratitude and amazement as this humble young woman had accomplished what they couldn't, restoring their son's will to live. One June morning, while they breakfasted together in the dining room, Andrés broke the silence with a question that surprised Mayara. "Do you believe in God?" She set her coffee cup on the table, choosing her words carefully. She didn't want to scare him or push him away with too intense a response. "Yes, I believe in him. He's the only thing that has sustained me in the hardest moments," she replied simply. Andrés remained silent for a moment, slowly stirring his hot chocolate. Then, in a barely audible voice, he asked, "Do you think your Bible might have something that could help me?" Mayara's heart leapt. For months, she had prayed for wisdom to know when the right moment was to speak to him about faith. And now, without forcing it, Andrés was opening that door. She controlled her emotion and responded naturally, "Of course. If you want, I can read you something after breakfast." Andrés nodded slightly, and for the first time in a long while, Mayara noticed something different in his expression. The bitterness was beginning to dissolve, giving way to something that resembled hope. That afternoon, after clearing the dishes, Mayara brought her worn Bible, the same one inherited from her grandmother. She sat on the armchair by the window in Andrés' room and began reading Psalm 23 with a clear, calm voice. "The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures." The words flowed like fresh water over dry land. Andrés listened with absolute attention, each word penetrating places in his heart he had kept closed for months. When Mayara finished reading, Andrés remained silent for several minutes. Finally, with a trembling voice, he confessed, "It's been a long time since I thought about God. When I lost my sight, I thought he had abandoned me, that if he really existed, he would never have done this to me." Mayara understood that feeling more than he imagined. She too had been angry with God years ago when she lost her father in an accident. She had questioned, cried, felt the sky was empty. "I was angry with God once too," she admitted honestly. "When my dad died, I didn't understand why he took him from me. But over time I learned that sometimes God allows darkness because it's where we truly learn to seek his light." Her words weren't a sermon or a religious lesson. They were simply the truth of someone who had walked through the valley of shadows and come out the other side. Andrés felt something stir in his chest, as if a rusty door was beginning to open slowly. From that day, Bible reading became part of their daily routine. Every afternoon after lunch, Mayara read a different passage. Sometimes they were psalms of comfort. Other times, stories of people who faced impossible trials and saw God's hand work miracles. Andrés didn't just listen. He began asking questions, reflecting aloud on what those words meant for his own life. They discussed faith, the purpose of suffering, the hope that exists even in the darkest night. The conversation stretched for hours, and at some point, they stopped being just about the Bible. They talked about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Mayara told him about her childhood in Iztapalapa, about how her mother worked cleaning houses to give her an education. Andrés spoke of the pressure he had always felt as a family heir, of how blindness had freed him from expectations he never wanted to fulfill. Between verse and verse, between story and story, something more began to bloom. It was imperceptible at first, so subtle that neither recognized it immediately, but it was there, growing like a plant finding its way to the sun. Andrés began to look forward to the moment Mayara arrived each morning. Her voice became the favorite melody of his days, her laugh the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Mayara, for her part, found herself smiling for no apparent reason when she thought of Andrés. She caught herself choosing her clothes more carefully each day, though he couldn't see them. She worried when he was silent, rejoiced when he shared something personal. One afternoon, while walking the garden arm in arm, Andrés stopped suddenly. "Mayara, I want you to know that these months with you have been different. I don't know how to explain it, but for the first time since I lost my sight, I feel I have a reason to get up each day." She felt her heart race. "I found something special here too, Andrés," she responded softly. They said no more. It wasn't necessary. Both knew that what was growing between them went far beyond a simple caregiver-patient relationship. The doctors still had no answers. Every 3 months, Andrés attended new checkups where they repeated the same tests, hoping to discover something different. But the results were always identical. His eyes were physically perfect. His optic nerves functioned correctly, and yet the blindness remained an unsolved mystery. International researchers continued documenting his case, publishing articles in specialized medical journals, debating theories that never reached a concrete conclusion. To science, Andrés Montes was a fascinating enigma. To him, it was simply his reality. But something had changed inside him during those months. The burning rage that consumed him at the beginning was gone. Desperation had given way to a serene acceptance, and that serenity came with something deeper: faith. The same faith Mayara had planted with patience, watering it day by day with words of hope and verses full of promises. It was a quiet September night, 6 months after Mayara entered his life. The fresh air came to the half-open window of his room, carrying the scent of jasmine growing in the garden. Mayara had said goodbye to him minutes before, after reading him the last chapter of Proverbs. "Rest, Andrés. Tomorrow will be a beautiful day," she had said with that sweetness that made him feel complete. When he heard her footsteps fade down the hallway, Andrés remained sitting on his bed, wrapped in deep silence. But this time, it wasn't a heavy silence of loneliness. It was one filled with peace. He felt an impulse he couldn't ignore, a need to speak to God in a way he had never experienced before. Slowly, he slid off the bed until he was kneeling on the soft carpet. He clasped his hands in front of his chest and closed his eyes, though the darkness was the same whether they were open or closed. And then he began to pray. "Lord," he whispered with trembling voice, "I know I've been far from you for a long time, that I doubted your existence, that I blamed you for what happened to me. But now I understand that you are always here, patiently waiting for me to return." The words flowed from the depths of his soul, unfiltered, without pretense. "I won't ask you to restore my sight. I don't need to see the world to know it's beautiful. Mayara has taught me that. But there's something I do want to ask, something I long for with all my heart." He paused, feeling tears begin to roll down his cheeks. "Give me a chance, Lord, just one. Let me see her face, even for an instant. Let me behold the woman who gave me back my life, who taught me to trust in you again, who became my reason to wake up each morning. I need nothing more. I just want to see Mayara once before this life ends." His voice broke at the end, and for several minutes he remained there, kneeling in the darkness, feeling a presence he couldn't explain but that filled the room. When he finally stood and returned to bed, an inexplicable peace enveloped him like a warm embrace. There were no heavenly voices, no visible miraculous signs. But deep in his spirit, Andrés knew something had changed, that his prayer had been heard. He fell asleep that night with a smile on his lips, dreaming of colors he no longer remembered, but that his heart had never forgotten. Meanwhile, in heaven, God was already preparing the miracle, not in the way the doctors would expect, nor following any scientific protocol, because God's ways are higher than man's ways, and his plans always exceed human expectations. What Andrés didn't know was that his request was about to become reality in a more beautiful way than he could ever have imagined. And that miracle would not only change his life, but also transform everything he believed about love, faith, and God's purpose. Don't forget to like this video and comment "Faith in God" if you're enjoying this incredible story. The following days passed with apparent normality. Andrés continued his daily routine, breakfasting with Mayara, walking in the garden. She read the news and Bible passages, and they conversed about everything and nothing. But there was something different in him that Mayara noticed without being able to pinpoint exactly what it was. There was a new serenity in his expression, a more frequent smile on his lips. When she asked if everything was okay, he simply nodded and said he felt at peace, closer to God than ever before. Mayara attributed it to the spiritual growth he had been experiencing, unaware that behind that peace was a specific prayer and a miracle on its way. Andrés' parents also noticed a change and silently thanked the presence of this young woman who had brought light to their home. Everything seemed to be exactly where it should be, like the pieces of a divine puzzle finally beginning to fit together. But the most extraordinary night of their lives was just hours away. Andrés woke slowly, as he did every morning for the past 7 months. But there was something strange about this awakening, something he couldn't immediately identify. Still with his eyes closed, he felt a different sensation, as if something had changed in the atmosphere of his room. Normally, when he opened his eyes, he was greeted by the same dense, absolute darkness he always knew. But this time, even before opening them fully, he perceived something impossible: light. Not an imagined light or a memory of what light was, but real light filtering through his closed eyelids. His heart began to pound. He thought he was dreaming, that his mind was playing a cruel trick. He remained still for several seconds, terrified to open his eyes and confirm it had all been an illusion, but the sensation persisted. Slowly, with trembling hands, he brought one hand in front of his face and then, with a courage he didn't know he had, he opened his eyes. What he saw left him completely paralyzed. The dawn light entered softly through the window, tinting everything with golden and pink hues. He could really see. Andrés blinked once, twice, 3 times, unable to process what he was experiencing. He looked at his hand in front of him, moving his fingers slowly, marveling at every detail he'd forgotten: the lines of his palm, the tone of his skin, the shape of his nails. He turned his head toward the window and saw the white curtains moving gently with the breeze. Beyond, the sky was waking with colors that seemed more beautiful than he remembered. Tears burst from his eyes uncontrollably, rolling down his cheeks as a choked sob escaped his throat. He brought both hands to his face, feeling the wetness of tears that wouldn't stop falling. "My God," he whispered with a broken voice. "My God, I can see, I can see." He jumped to his feet, staggering slightly because his legs were trembling too. He walked to the mirror hanging on the wall, that mirror he had avoided for months because he couldn't bear the idea of seeing himself without seeing. And there was his reflection, Andrés Montez, the same but completely transformed. He had lost a little weight. His hair was longer than he used to keep it, and in his eyes was something new, a depth that hadn't existed before the blindness. But most importantly, he could see himself. He touched his face as he observed his reflection, assuring himself it was real, that he wasn't hallucinating. The miracle had happened. God had answered his prayer in the most literal way possible. He fell to his knees in front of the mirror with his hands raised to the sky and began to pray aloud, not caring if anyone heard. "Thank you, Lord. Thank you for hearing me. Thank you for this gift I don't deserve. Thank you for showing me that nothing is impossible for you." He cried for several minutes, releasing months of pain, frustration, fear, and now a joy so immense his body could barely contain it. When he finally calmed a little, an idea struck him like lightning. Mayara. He had to see Mayara, but at that moment, something stopped him. An inner voice, clear and firm, whispered his heart to wait, that this miracle wasn't just for him, but also for her, and it deserved to be revealed in a special way. Andrés looked at the calendar hanging on his wall, and his heart leapt. 3 days. In 3 days, it would be Mayara's birthday. She had mentioned it casually a few weeks ago, saying she'd turned 22 on September 12th, but she hadn't made a big deal of it. Andrés, however, had kept that date in his memory, and now, suddenly, it all made sense. This was the perfect moment. He would keep the secret for 3 days. He would continue acting as if he couldn't see, and on her birthday he would give Mayara the most extraordinary gift she could imagine, the revelation of God's miracle. The idea thrilled him so much he had to sit down again to process it all. But first, he needed to tell his parents. They deserved to know immediately. He opened his bedroom door carefully. The hallway was empty and silent. It was barely 6 a.m., and Mayara wouldn't arrive until 8. He walked to his parents' room, observing every detail of the house as if seeing it for the first time. The paintings on the walls, the plants in the corners, the light filtering through the windows. Everything was a miracle in itself. He knocked softly on his parents' door. "Dad, Mom." His voice trembled a little. He heard movement inside, and seconds later, his mother opened the door with a worried expression. "Andrés, what's wrong, son? Are you okay?" He looked directly into her eyes. In that instant, she understood. Her eyes widened, her hand flew to her mouth, and a choked cry escaped her throat. "Andrés, you can—" She couldn't finish the sentence. His father appeared behind her, confused, but when he saw his son looking at them directly, his expression changed from bewilderment to absolute shock. The three embraced in the doorway, crying, laughing, unable to believe what was happening. "God performed a miracle," Andrés whispered through tears. "And I want Mayara to be the first to know publicly. In 3 days, on her birthday." His parents nodded through tears, understanding they were witnessing something that transcended all human logic. The parents of Andrés couldn't believe what they were witnessing. After the initial embrace, the three sat in the living room, still in pajamas, as Andrés recounted every detail of the miracle, how it felt a light through his eyelids, the exact moment he opened his eyes and could see again the prayer he had made 3 nights before. His mother cried nonstop, holding her son's face in her hands, looking into his eyes as if wanting to etch that moment into her memory forever. His father, a man who rarely showed emotion, had red eyes and a broken voice when he finally spoke. "It's a miracle, a true miracle of God," he repeated over and over, as if needing to say it aloud, convince himself it was real. Andrés explained his plan, to keep the secret for 3 days and reveal it on Mayara's birthday. He wanted that moment to be special, not just for him, but also for the woman who had been God's instrument to bring light into his life. His parents agreed without hesitation, understanding the depth of what their son felt for this young woman. They organized everything in secret. Andrés' mother contacted a decorating service to prepare the house for the birthday. There would be flowers everywhere, warm lights, a table with Mayara's favorite dishes. They would invite a few close relatives, just enough to make the moment intimate and special. Andrés participated in every decision, though he had to pretend in front of Mayara that he knew nothing of what was happening. Excitement and anxiety consumed him equally. Every time he heard Mayara's voice approaching, his heart raced, knowing in a few days he could finally see her. He practiced in front of the mirror how he would react when that moment came, what words he would use, how he would reveal it. But he knew that when the real moment arrived, no rehearsal could prepare him for the emotion he would feel. His parents, accomplices in this beautiful secret, smiled every time they saw him so nervous and happy at the same time. The whole house seemed to vibrate with a different energy, as if even the walls knew something extraordinary was about to happen. When Mayara arrived that morning, Andrés had to make the greatest effort of his life not to reveal anything. She entered his room as always with her warm smile and cheerful greeting. "Good morning, Andrés. How did you wake up today?" He, sitting on his bed with his eyes closed on purpose, smiled in her direction. "Very well, Mayara, better than ever." But when he opened his eyes, what he saw took his breath away. There she was at last. Mayara had her hair loose that day, falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She wore a simple olive green dress that highlighted the warm tone of her skin. Her eyes were exactly as he had imagined in his dreams. Large, expressive, dark brown with golden flecks when the light hit them a certain way. She had a smile that lit up her entire face, and slight dimples marked her cheeks when she laughed. She was beautiful, not with an artificial or superficial beauty, but with that genuine beauty that comes from a pure heart. Andrés felt tears threatening to spill, but he held them back, breathing deeply. Mayara approached, concerned to see his shining eyes. "Andrés, are you okay? Does something hurt?" He quickly shook his head, searching for a believable excuse. "No, nothing hurts. It's just that lately I felt very close to God, as if something inside me is healed. Do you understand? And it's all thanks to you, Mayara. Thanks to your patience, your faith, your love." The words came straight from his heart, And though he wasn't revealing the full miracle, every word was absolutely true. Mayara sat beside him on the bed, taking his hand tenderly. "You don't have to thank me for anything. It's been an honor to accompany you on this journey. Seeing how you've grown in your faith, how you found peace, that's reward enough for me." Andrés squeezed her hand, memorizing the sensation of her fingers interlaced with his, now knowing exactly how they looked together. He wanted to tell her everything, reveal the secret right then, but he held back. There were only 3 days left. He could wait 3 more days. During those 72 hours, Andrés observed everything Mayara did with an attention she never noticed. He watched her cook in the kitchen, moving with natural grace as she prepared food. He observed her reading the newspaper, slightly frowning when she came across a troubling story. He watched her read the Bible, noting how her lips formed each word carefully, how her eyes lit up when she reached a passage she particularly liked. He saw the way she treated him, with that perfect blend of professional care and genuine affection. Every gesture she made confirmed what he had known in his heart for months. Mayara wasn't there just for the job. She was there because she loved him. Perhaps she hadn't admitted it aloud. Perhaps she hadn't even fully realized it herself. But it was in every look she gave him, thinking he couldn't see, in every subtle caress when she guided him while walking, in every prayer she whispered for him when she thought he wasn't listening. And that pure, selfless love was the greatest gift anyone had ever given him. The day of the birthday finally arrived, and with it, the moment of revelation that would change everything forever. The morning of September 12th dawned clear and beautiful. Mayara arrived at the Montez house without suspecting a thing. She had mentioned her birthday only once, casually weeks ago, and didn't expect any kind of celebration. For her, it was just another workday, another day caring for Andrés, and that was more than enough. But when she walked the front door, she found Andrés' mother waiting for her with a mysterious smile. "Mayara, dear, today is your special day. Andrés wants you to spend the afternoon with us. But first, why don't you go home and change? Put on something nice. We have a little surprise for you." Mayara blinked confused, but the genuine excitement in Mrs. Montez's eyes was so real she couldn't refuse. She accepted shyly, unaware of what awaited her. She returned 2 hours later, wearing a pale pink dress that had been her mother's, the only elegant dress she owned. She had let her hair down and applied a little natural makeup. When she rang the bell, her heart beat nervously without knowing why. The door opened, and Mayara was speechless. The living room was completely transformed. There were white and gold balloons floating near the ceiling, fresh flowers in every corner, and a table decorated with an elegant tablecloth filled with delicious-looking food. Some of Andrés' relatives were there, smiling as she entered, but what struck her most was seeing Andrés standing in the center of the room, dressed in an impeccable white shirt and dark pants, waiting for her. Though she knew he couldn't see her, something about his posture seemed different that afternoon. "Surprise!" everyone said in unison as she walked in. Mayara brought her hands to her mouth, feeling tears form in her eyes. Never in her life had she had a party like this. Her family had always been humble, and celebrations were limited to a simple cake and a hug. This was more than she had ever dreamed. She approached slowly, overwhelmed by emotion. "I can't believe you did all this for me," she whispered with a trembling voice. Andrés' mother hugged her warmly. "You deserve it, daughter, more than you can imagine." The celebration began with joy. They ate, laughed, shared anecdotes. Andrés' parents told funny stories from his childhood, and everyone joked and enjoyed the moment. Mayara couldn't stop smiling, feeling part of a family that wasn't hers by blood but had welcomed with a love she had never experienced before. Andrés stayed close to her the whole time, participating in the conversations but clearly waiting for something. When it was time for the cake, everyone sang Las Mananitas with enthusiasm. Mayara closed her eyes and made a silent wish before blowing out the candles. She didn't ask for anything material. She only wished for Andrés to find the happiness he deserved, with or without his sight. When she opened her eyes, she found everyone looking at her tenderly. But then Andrés stood up slowly. An expectant silence filled the room. Everyone knew what was about to happen, except Mayara, who looked at him with curiosity and a hint of concern. Andrés walked toward her without hesitation, without reaching out, seeking guidance, without the insecurity of someone who can't see. Mayara frowned slightly, not yet understanding what she was witnessing. He stopped in front of her, so close he could see every detail of her face. Tears began to roll down Andrés' cheeks as he looked directly into her eyes. Mayara, he began with a voice broken by emotion. 3 days ago, God answered a prayer I made from the depth of my heart. I asked for just one thing, to see the face of the woman who gave me back my life, who taught me to trust in him again, who became my reason to wake up each morning. He paused, letting his words sink in. Mayara began to understand, her eyes widening more and more. Mayara, I can see now, and the first face I wanted to behold was yours. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Mayara brought both hands to her mouth, a choked sob escaping her throat. What did you say? She whispered, unable to believe what she had just heard. Andrés smiled through his tears, gently taking Mayara's hands in his. I can see you, Mayara. I can see your eyes, your smile, every gesture you make. And you're even more beautiful than I imagined in my dreams. Mayara began to cry uncontrollably, trembling from head to toe. It's real? You can really see me? Andrés nodded, and in that moment, she threw herself into his arms with a force that nearly made him stagger. They hugged with intensity as everyone present cried with them. Andrés' mother sobbed in her husband's arms. The relatives wiped tears with handkerchiefs, and the entire room seemed to vibrate with an emotion that transcended words. Mayara pulled back slightly to look into Andrés' eyes, and he looked back at her. He really looked at her, and both knew in that instant that what they felt went beyond any logical explanation. Without saying more, they closed their eyes, and surrounded by the love of those with them, they thanked God right there. Thank you, Lord, Andrés whispered. Thank you for this miracle. Thank you for hearing us, Mayara added through tears. And in that sacred moment, everyone present knew they had witnessed something science could never explain, but that faith understood perfectly. The emotion in the room had not yet subsided when Andrés' mother slowly approached the center. Everyone looked at her attentively, noticing she had something more to say. Her eyes were red from crying, but on her face was a deep peace, a certainty that only comes from experiencing God's hand tangibly. She stood beside her son and Mayara, taking the young woman's hand in hers with maternal tenderness. There's something I need to tell you, she began with a trembling voice. Something only my husband and I knew until now, but I think it's time to share. Everyone drew a little closer, forming an intimate circle around the three. Andrés looked at his mother with curiosity, not knowing what could be so significant. Mayara, still with fresh tears on her cheeks, listened attentively. Mrs. Montez took a deep breath before continuing, needing to gather strength for what she was about to reveal. When we decided to hire a caregiver for Andrés, we contacted the two most recognized professionals we could find. Both had years of experience, impeccable references, everything we could want. She paused, looking directly at Mayara with eyes full of meaning, but then both canceled one after the other, with no real explanations that made sense. At that moment, I felt desperate. I didn't know what to do, how to help my son, who was sinking deeper into darkness every day. Her voice broke slightly, and her husband stepped closer to place a comforting hand on her shoulder. That night, alone in my room, I knelt and prayed as I had never prayed before. I didn't ask God to send someone qualified. I didn't ask for experience or certificates. I asked for something much simpler and much deeper. Tears began to roll down her face again. I begged him to send the right person. Someone he chose, not me, someone who could reach my son's heart in a way we hadn't been able to. Someone who could bring true light to his darkness. Andrés felt a lump form in his throat as he listened to his mother's words. Mayara trembled visibly, beginning to grasp the magnitude of what she was hearing. Mrs. Montez turned fully toward Mayara, now taking both of the young woman's hands in hers. The next day, the agency called to apologize and mentioned one last candidate, a 21-year-old young woman with little experience, but with something special they couldn't explain. When I heard your name, Mayara, something moved in my heart. I knew, with a certainty I can't describe, that you were the answer to my prayer. Mayara's sobs intensified, her whole body shaking with emotion. It wasn't a coincidence that the other two canceled. It wasn't chance that you appeared just when we needed you most. It was God. God orchestrated every detail of this story from beginning. Mrs. Montez hugged Mayara tightly, and they cried together. God placed you here, daughter, not just to be a caregiver, but to be light in my son's darkness, to teach him again about faith, about love, about hope. And look what God has done through you. Everyone present was now crying openly, understanding they had been part of a divine plan far greater than they had ever imagined. Andrés approached his mother and hugged her tightly. Mom, thank you for praying. Thank you for trusting in God when everything seemed lost. Then he turned to Mayara, taking her face in his hands with infinite tenderness. And you, Mayara, thank you for answering God's call. Thank you for not giving up on me when I was difficult, when I was full of rage and bitterness. Thank you for showing me that true light doesn't come from the eyes, but from the heart. Mayara tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come, choked by emotion. Finally, with a barely audible voice, she managed to say, I didn't understand why God had brought me here either. I only knew I had to come, that something important was waiting for me in this place. Now I understand that he had a purpose in the beginning, not just for you, Andrés, but also for me, because finding you showed me that true love exists, that miracles are real, and that God always has a perfect plan, even when we can't see it. Andrés' father, a man who had been skeptical about faith for years, wiped his tears and spoke for the first time that afternoon. I've been a fool, he admitted with a hoarse voice. I thought I could control everything with money and connections, but God taught me there are things beyond my power, and his power is infinitely greater than anything I can do. Everyone in the room joined hands, forming a circle. What had started as a birthday party had transformed into something much more sacred, a moment of collective worship, a shared recognition that God had worked a miracle, not only physical, but also spiritual. Andrés' grandmother, a 78-year-old woman who had remained silent until then, began to sing an old praise song she had learned in her youth with a broken voice. One by one, the others joined in the singing. They didn't have perfect voices or professional tuning, but they sang from the heart with a sincerity that made each note beautiful in God's ears. Andrés and Mayara remained in the center, embraced, crying and smiling at the same time, knowing that moment would mark them forever. It was a visible confirmation that God not only hears prayers, but answers them in ways that surpass human expectations, that he weaves perfect stories even when we only see loose threads, and that his love for his children is so great, he moves heaven and earth to bless them. But the story didn't end there, because God had prepared one last chapter to seal everything with his eternal glory. The following Monday morning, Andrés and his parents presented themselves at the hospital where he had been treated for all those months. The doctors were urgently convened for an extraordinary meeting. When Andrés walked into the office without assistance, looking directly at the medical team that had studied him for so long, silence was absolute. The lead doctor, the same one who had declared his case impossible, stood slowly with an expression of total disbelief. Mr. Montez, can you see me? Andrés nodded with a calm smile. Yes, doctor, I can see you perfectly. What followed was a whirlwind of exams, tests, and more tests. The doctors examined every inch of his eyes, repeated all the evaluations they had done months before, searching for any logical explanation for what they were witnessing. But the results were baffling. There were no physical changes. Andrés' eyes were exactly as they had been when he was blind. There was no inflammation that had subsided, no blockages that had cleared, no medical alteration that could explain the recovery of his sight. It was, in scientific terms, impossible. And yet, there was Andrés, seeing with perfect clarity. The specialists met privately for hours, debating, analyzing, seeking any rational explanation. Some proposed theories about psychosomatic conditions. Others spoke of inexplicable spontaneous remission. Some even questioned if the initial diagnosis had been correct, but all records were there, meticulously documented. Andrés Montez had been completely blind for 7 months and now could see, without treatment, without medical intervention, without any explanation science could offer. Finally, the head of the research team summoned the Montez family to his office. He was a 65-year-old man with over 4 decades dedicated to ophthalmology, internationally recognized for his contributions to medicine. He removed his glasses and set them on the desk, looking at Andrés with a mix of awe and humility. "Mr. Montez, in all my years of medical practice, I've never seen anything like this. We have no explanation, no precedents. And honestly, I don't think science will ever explain what happened to you." He paused, carefully choosing his next words. "We're going to close your case. Not because we don't care, but because we've reached the limit of what medicine can comprehend. What you experience transcends our knowledge." Andrés listened with serenity. There was no triumph in his expression, no need to prove anything. He simply nodded with respect. "I understand, doctor, and I appreciate everything you and your team try to do for me. But there's something I need to tell you." He leaned forward, looking the doctor directly in the eyes. 3 days ago, I knelt in my room and made a prayer. I asked God to let me see, even for an instant, and he answered. It wasn't science, doctor. It was a miracle from God." The doctor remained silent for several seconds, processing the words. Finally, with a soft voice, he replied, "You know, Mr. Montez, I've been a man of science all my life. I believed everything has a logical explanation, but cases like yours make me question that perhaps, just perhaps, there are forces in this universe that go beyond what we can measure and understand." It wasn't an instant conversion, but it was a crack in his skepticism, a door ajar to the possibility of the divine. Andrés smiled with understanding. "I don't need you to believe in my God, doctor. I just need you to know that I believe, and that faith saved me when nothing else could." The following months were of adjustment and celebration. Andrés had to relearn some things, adapt again to a visual world after a month of darkness, but he did so with joy, marveling every day at things he had once taken for granted. A sunrise, his parents' faces, the flowers in the garden, and above all, being able to see Mayara. Their relationship grew naturally and deeply. They were no longer caregiver and patient. They were two souls who had met in the midst of the storm and discovered they were destined to walk together. 6 months after the miracle, in a simple but beautiful ceremony in a small chapel in Mexico City, Andrés and Mayara married. It was an intimate wedding with only close family and a few friends. Mayara walked down the aisle in a simple but elegant white dress. And when she reached the altar, Andrés had to wipe away tears before he could say his vows. "I promise to love you in the light and in the darkness," he said with a firm voice, "because I learned that true love doesn't need eyes to see, only a heart willing to give itself completely." Mayara, crying with happiness, responded, "And I promise to be your light when the world seems dark, because God brought me to you with a purpose. And that purpose is to love you every day of my life." 2 years later, in a cozy apartment not far from where it all began, Andrés and Mayara awaited the arrival of their first child. The baby's room was already prepared, painted in soft yellow and white tones, with a wooden crib and stuffed animals waiting for their little occupant. Mayara was in her 8th month of pregnancy, radiant and happy. One afternoon, as they rested together on the sofa, Andrés placed his hand on his wife's belly, feeling the small kicks of their son. "We've decided on the name, haven't we?" he asked with a smile. Mayara nodded, placing her hand over his. "Emmanuel, because it means God with us." And that's exactly what we've experienced since the day we met. Andrés kissed her tenderly, his heart overflowing with gratitude. His life had become a living testimony that miracles exist, that God hears prayers, and that even in the deepest darkness there is hope. He would never forget those 7 months of blindness, but now he saw them for what they truly were, the necessary path to find true light. Because sometimes God allows us to lose physical sight, so we can gain spiritual vision. Sometimes he leads us through the valley of shadows to teach us to trust in him completely. And when he finally restores us, he does so in a way so perfect that no one can doubt his hand was present every moment. If this story touched your heart, let me tell you that God's miracles still happen today. No matter how dark your situation seems, no matter how impossible your circumstances look, God is still on the throne, still listening to prayers, still doing the impossible. Like Andrés, you might be going through your own dark night, but remember, darkness is never the end of the story. It's simply the space where God prepares his most beautiful miracle. Trust in his timing, trust in his plan, and never stop praying. Because when science gives up, when the world has no answers, God is just beginning to work. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that miracles still exist. May God bless you abundantly, light your path in moments of darkness, and allow you to experience his unconditional love every day of your life. May you find your own light amidst the shadows, and never forget that for God, nothing is impossible. In the name of Jesus, amen.